Hey everybody, thanks for coming to the webinar today. I'm Megan. If we haven't met before, I am the onboarding coach here at Team Edgar, and I'm thrilled to be doing this webinar with Ashley today because she is going to be a wealth of knowledge all about making sure you are getting the most out of your status updates, increasing your ROI while also saving time. And you know we love saving time here at Team Edgar. So we are really thrilled to be joined with her. I'm going to pass it on over to her. She'll do the webinar. I will be in the chat, and we would love to know who's here as well. So thank you, Caroline. Hello from Scotland. That is so exciting. Gabriel from
Wow.
Yeah, you guys use the chat over here. Keenan, welcome. I am also in Denver, Keenan, so I'm glad to have you here. Ashley's in Toronto, but let us know where you guys are joining us from. Kelly from Seattle, super exciting. Let us know what industries you're in. If you see someone who's in the same industry as you, one of my favorite parts of doing webinars like this is being able to provide a place for you guys to network. So connect with each other, see if you guys can make some cool connections, and I will pass it on over to Ashley to kick this off.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Megan. I'm Ashley. I live in Toronto, actually, and I am a marketing consultant person. So basically what that means is someone's trying to target a specific audience, like a company is trying to target a specific audience, and they're really struggling with that on social or just the web in general. I work with them to figure out like who they should target and how they should do that and all that fun stuff. So yeah. So I'll just start the slides. I usually don't use slides, so if there's a few little hiccups, I apologize. Okay, so this is about how to increase social media return on investment while also saving time, because I think we're all used to these ideas that you need to spend more time on something, but that's not necessarily true. So I kind of mentioned that already, but there's my website if you want to look me up or connect. So this is basically the whole reason why I'm doing this webinar. Oh, hi everyone. Sorry, I'm new to this. It's nice that I can chat and talk at the same time. Okay, so most companies I've worked with, they have no way to track if their social media efforts are working or if they're in vain. They have no way to know if they're spending too much time on something, if they're getting a return on that time. They're just totally taking shots in the dark. They tend to not think it's a shot in the dark because they, think that getting a vanity metric with, an influencer or something is success, but that's often just not true. So this is another thing that a lot of people notice. Hi, Steph. Hi, John. Hi, Diane. Hi, Dawn. This is so exciting. Okay, so a lot of people assume that if they're not getting direct sales from social, then it's a waste of time. And if you've run social media for clients or you're trying to build a case for why an employer should hire people in social, you've probably encountered this. They want to get a direct sale from that specific link, and that's just not at all how it works. Sorry, I'm just getting used to the setup here. Okay, so here are very common I call them time guzzlers, that sometimes companies run when they're doing social media, but I also should mention that sometimes it's your clients will actually want you to do these things, or they think that they're on the right track, and it can be hard to kind of put them on the right track. So like manually researching in your niche for every post, targeting the wrong audience, like I said, looking for vanity metrics, thinking a conversion is like posting a link to something with a CTA, and then if that gets a sale, that's the only metric you have of if it's working or not, but that's not how it works. Focusing on promotion and not also identifying what paths your audience will take on social. So you're assuming that a common thing I see is that like people will automatically assume that because someone has like followed them that they're in like the engagement phase or like the what's it called, the consideration phase. That's a very common thing, but that doesn't at all indicate that you're there. Other ones, so Yeah, I kind of mentioned this before. There's a tendency to kind of assume that like if someone is really popular in your niche and they have a lot of followers and you can engage them, that something will come out of that. And that's often just not true. Often the people you need to be targeting. Hi, Amelia. Hi, Rebecca. Hi, Lance. Hi, Dawn. Yeah, there's this idea that the powerful people, if you can engage them, that there'll be this trickle down effect and you'll get sales from that. And that often just doesn't happen. It's kind of a waste of time. And especially to get their attention, it's actually a lot of work. So another issue is posting throughout the day or posting haphazardly, because that way, if you're not putting things into chunks, you can't figure out if it's working or not. You can't really assess the value of your time. And also just posting on popular topics, because like it's the in thing, even if it's in the in thing in your niche, if it's not supporting your target audience's goals, yeah, it's a popular thing, but that's not going to engage people in your business. It's not going to lead people down a funnel if you're not supporting them with their problems. So this is a big thing that I feel most people really need to think hard about. If you don't figure out the path your target audience wants to take with you, you're wasting your time. Because if you are assuming, say you're assuming that your audience, like I mentioned before, that they're in the consideration phase, well, maybe they're not. Maybe they're in the awareness phase, or you're assuming that they're a warm lead, or you're assuming they're a potential lead at all, and maybe they're not receptive to that, or maybe they aren't. If you keep going down that same path, but it's not the actual path that's the right fit for that platform or that relationship, you are wasting your time. So what is a path? First, you have to define what a worthwhile relationship investment looks like. So you have to figure out, okay, if it's not like an influencer, if it's not, top level person in my niche, if it's not a CEO, who is it? Excuse me. And sometimes it's people you might not expect. So just a very light example, probably a more obvious example is, say you're a toy company and you create toys. Well, your target audience isn't even on social. If you make toys for toddlers, they're not on social. So you have to look at the higher level audience of who makes that buying decision. Well, it's moms usually. And that's why a lot of companies tend to target moms in their marketing. So that's a more obvious example, but that applies to any company and anything. The decision maker in your sales ecosystem might not be who you think it is. And the important thing is to figure out who that person is or who has influence over the decision maker. And also, look for markers, like make it really objective for yourself. So for example, say if someone follows me on Twitter, they've retweeted my account 5 times, written a response to like 5 of my tweets. Those are the kinds of markers that I use to gauge interest. And I can say, well, I can reasonably assume that they're receptive for me to take them down to the next part of the funnel. And it also really helps because it can help me identify where they are in that cycle. And if they're even a lead at all. And if they're not a lead, are they anything to me at all? So it's really important to have those objective markers. And then what would the next stage look like? Well, if they're in the consideration stage, I'm not going to try to convert them then. I might send them a personalized DM about whatever we're talking about, suggesting a subscription to my newsletter. Maybe if I've written a blog post or something that's really, really relevant to what I've spoken about with this potential lead. Then you kind of go from there. Ooh, Lake Tahoe, cool, great. So yeah, those are the kinds of things that I do for that particular stage because I've identified those markers that are a good fit for that particular audience. Yeah, so that's what I do. That's just an example. I'm not saying that's what you should do too. I'm just saying like you have to figure out the markers for your own particular client. And here's another way to tell if you're on the right track. this could just be the example I just shared. That could have just been a one-off, but because I did it more than a few times and it converted me every time, I'm safe in assuming that it's effective. So I have all these markers that I use to determine if something is worth my time, and that's what I use to decide what my future actions are going to be like. So it is a multi-step. Converting people via social is a multi-step process, and usually social media is just one little piece of it. Sometimes it's just getting people into the awareness stage or the consideration stage, or it's more about nurturing people, through one whole stage. The problem with a lot of people who don't understand quite how this works is they think that you can create awareness and close a sale all in one thing. And that's just not how it works on social media. And if you have clients who are trying to do that, or, your employers who think that's what they need to get out of it, you are going to waste your time if you take that approach. So look at what stage of the sales cycle the person is in, your target audience is in, and build your campaigning around that. So yeah, it's usually what social media I find is usually aimed at awareness or nurturing. So they're usually kind of either totally new to you, or they're loyal to you and interested in some way, and you're sort of nurturing them towards a sale. You won't necessarily actually make a sale there. And yeah, there are usually trends and conversions about what works and what doesn't, and that's another reason it's really helpful for maximizing your time, because if you have these objective markers, like I mentioned earlier, and you're not meeting those with your campaigns and your community engagement, you can just toss that and be done with it, because you have enough reason to think that it doesn't work. And of course, I'm sure all of you know this, to really get any kind of sales in business on social, you almost always have to have like an existing relationship with that person. So I used to use the example of Kim Kardashian, because people would think, well, why can't I get a sale from just tweeting once or something, or tweeting a bunch of times about something? And I use the example of, well, Kim Kardashian doesn't even do that. Or she couldn't even get away with it. But then I think, well, that's actually a bad example, because Kim Kardashian knows her audience, and then she knows what they would like, so she wouldn't even do that. So I don't even have an example at this point. The point is that you have to have a lot of markers, and you have to know your audience and what they want and what they expect from you. So how do you know if a relationship is worthwhile? Oh, thanks, Mohammed. He says exactly, it's different for each client. That's right. It's all about personalizing and personalizing to the path that the people are on. And also, you might have lots of different audiences in your path, in your network, who are on different paths. So you're not necessarily catering just to one audience. So they're in your target audience. They fit all the criteria, or most of them, that you set out, like we were talking about with those markers. But I really must stress that this making markers and that kind of thing only helps if you're targeting the right people. So you really need to do your research. You really do need to create a persona of who you're targeting and experiment, do lots of testing. You really do need to do a lot of testing. And I mentioned this before, but yeah, don't assume that because someone seems powerful or they know people that you should invest time in liking their posts, sharing their articles, mentioning them. Hi, Brian. All that. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's worth your while to do those things. The tendency is to think, well, these people have a lot of, followers who are in my audience, and if I get into their feeds because I've liked something, or they just happen to see me, that things will fall into place. But that just doesn't happen. I mean, they might see that you exist, but they're not going to go down your funnel just because they saw that you liked someone's page or something. So that's an argument you can make to an employer or a client who's like, well, why aren't we talking to this famous person or that famous person? They have so many followers. Or yeah, it's very, very seldom a good investment of time. So nurturing can equal higher return on investment for less work. Yeah, I actually probably spend less time on social media than I ever did before, and that's largely because I have all these objective criteria for assessing what's worthwhile. And I'm sorry if you can hear my dog in the background. I don't know why he's barking. Maybe my parents are coming home. I don't know. But yeah, so my apologies. Oh, bye, no. So why is nurturing less time consuming than trying to close a sale, for example, which you don't want to do, but just for the sake of argument. So you can create formulas for automatically researching content and people that your target audience wants to connect with. So like I was saying before, when you can make these little markers of like how to determine if someone is worth nurturing, you can also do that for content that's worth sharing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But yeah, this you don't really save time on nurturing if your approach is really promotional, because then you have to build all this content and it's harder to woo someone because they just feel like you're gonna sell them hard on everything. Yeah. So here's an example of, oh, hi, Mohammed. Yes, influencer seminars are really, yeah, they're really misleading. They kind of, yeah, I could probably do a whole webinar on that. We can talk about it a little after. But yeah, that's a really good point. If focusing on influencers is not a good idea. So here's an example of something you can do to assess what this formula should be. Like for example, Twitter. So like quoting an article plus mentioning the handle of like the author or someone who's mentioned in the article or the publication or a variety of those things, plus a link to the article and plus a niche hashtag. So like, if it's related to a conference or an industry thing, all that kind of thing. That's an example of a formula. Another one would be to put an emoji with a transformative story about something or other, plus a photo of people, not like a stock photo, but whatever you think would work. And that way, once you have a formula and you have a system in place, I call them recipes, you know that you can test those things. So you can just pull out the quote, or you can try a different hashtag. You can test those things independently, and that way you can see if it's working or not. And once you know that it's working, then you can keep doing that same thing. So you don't have to keep thinking up posts you should do. You have this formula that you've tested and you know that it works. And that way you can save a ton of time and know that you're converting the people that you need to convert, or you're not converting, but like nurturing the right people. And here are some other ways that nurturing saves time. It helps you take the pulse of your audience. So it kind of gives you, it's good for research. It gives you a sense of what they're receptive to. I'm really sorry about my dog, guys. I've tried to get him to stop barking. I'm hoping he stops soon. So my apologies. So yeah, it helps you take your audience's pulse. So you know what they're receptive to and you know where they are in the funnel. You can't really do that unless you're nurturing. You can scale relationships through word of mouth. You can, you don't have to create as much social media content because oh, thank you so much, Mohammed. Okay, apparently it's not barking. Thank you so much, Tessa. I feel like this is a good case study on like things that can go wrong when you're working from home. Okay. So yeah, you don't have to create as much social media content because you're just talking to people, you're having conversations, you're supporting their content. It's actually a lot less time consuming. So you can identify who and how you can encourage your keep barking to your goal. I love it. Thank you, Richard. That was beautiful. That makes me so happy. I will tell my dog that. His name is Pounce, by the way. I will tell Pounce you said that. So you can identify who and how you can encourage your target audience down a funnel, and you can create a formula for that, like I just described. And then if it works, you can apply it to everywhere, not necessarily in different platforms or to all different types of audiences or all types of goals, but you can definitely scale it. And I'll talk a little bit about scaling in a bit. So here's an example of target research automation. This is TweetDeck. Can I just, if you're really familiar with TweetDeck, or you have like a strong feeling about TweetDeck, can you just leave a comment? I'd really, really love to get, if people have any strong feelings, I would love to hear what they are. Because I'm actually fairly, oh, Kat loves TweetDeck, yay, okay. I only really started recently using it. Yes, thank you, Mohammed, yay, okay. I only started using it, yay, Sharon. I only started using it recently because I don't know if a lot of you are also annoyed that in the advanced search section, you still just like plug in your location. So I used to do that, and when they stopped having that function, then I was using Boolean operators in the search thing, and I was like, there has to be another way. And so that's why I started using TweetDeck, because here, as an example of automating the formulas, so not just automating research in general, but here is where you can actually make a formula, or you can put a formula once you know it works. Oh, Mohammed, you're a TweetDeck veteran, yay! Yeah, that's great. So this is why it can work. So one of the things in the formula you can put is like your location, because that's often very relevant, especially if you're niche targeting. And of course you can put in, you can mention who you want to target, you can, or the tweets that you want to see from other people or who they're mentioning, all that kind of thing is super helpful, I find. And you can also figure out like how many engagements a tweet has had, and then you only want to engage tweets that have like, you know, 10 retweets or something, or say you only want to engage with a tweet once it has a certain amount of engagements. If those are what your markers are, I'm not saying that's what they are, but through your testing, if you figure out those markers are present or they work, TweetDeck is one way you can automate that, so you don't have to keep inputting all the formulas and figure out what the Boolean operators are for the, you know, to plug it in. Yeah, so that's one example. And the reason it's important to track with the formula is because if you don't have a system, then you can't objectively check to see if it's working. So you can't isolate certain things, take them out, replace them with some other tactic, and see if it's working. Like you have no idea why it isn't working. You might be assuming that it's not working for a specific reason, but you could be totally way off. If you have a formula and you have a system, you can be really objective about it. And you can, that's also a great way to build a case in like a board meeting or something with a client or an employee. You know, you could put that forward and say, well, we had, you know, this is what we were doing and it led to X results, and we had X amount of signups to our newsletter after we did this, or, you know, 10 people joined our webinar after we did this, you know, community support thing, whatever it is, that it helps you build a stronger case to employers. And here's another example, Google Alerts. I'm sure most of you have heard of Google Alerts, but it's also just a great way to get, if you have a specific thing that you want to post about on social media, instead of manually having to research to find stuff on that every day, you can just make a Google alert for it. Now I use the example haircut tips. That's a bad example because it's so vague and usually only news articles come up, and that's not really the most effective thing to post a lot of the time. But yeah, just like anything, make markers for it and test and see what it works, and you know, try different regions, try different methods, just play with it. I also really liked, I might get it again, I really liked Sales Navigator on LinkedIn. Has anyone used Sales Navigator? If you can you leave me a comment? I'd love to know what you think about it. Because the reason I really liked Sales Navigator was it really helped me with those formulas I've been talking about. In the search function, you can actually search for LinkedIn post content. So if you're doing LinkedIn networking, and you're not just trying to find people in a certain like role or something, but if you want to target people who have been posting a certain type of content, or you want to find that content in your target audience that's worth sharing, you can actually do that in Sales Navigator. I don't have a subscription, so I can't show it to you, but there's like a little box in the search field that lets you put in like a quote or a hashtag or some combination of text or whatever, and then choose all the other parameters, what degree of connection and all that. Yeah, it's a really, really handy tool if you need to research others' content for LinkedIn. And RSS feeds are really good too. If you follow a website and you really like that website and you find yourself tweeting about it, just follow the RSS feed. And that way you don't have to keep manually checking to see if they're posting stuff. Thank you very much for sharing that. I used it briefly also. I, at the time, just couldn't justify the cost because, like I was saying, we need to be really objective about it, and yeah, it wasn't enough for me to subscribe. So here's what I mean by scaling your niche research. I briefly kind of mentioned this before. Yeah, what does it mean? So if you think about recipes, say you're making a dish for dinner, and the recipe is for 4 people. It serves 4 people, but you need it for 8 people. So instead of making the recipe twice, you just double the ingredients. That's scaling. That's what scaling is. And you can do very similar things in your marketing research by testing formulas and automating them like I just described, and using different markers and things like that to see what's working, and also just build a stronger case to your audience. So here are some examples in Meet Edgar of scaling. So you can actually connect RSS feeds to Meet Edgar so that you don't even have to manually pull in a feed that you like. You can just automatically track it. It's not really showing up very well on this thing, but yeah, if you go into that section, you can just look up a blog that you follow, for example, and you say you want to network with that person and you really like their content, just plug it in. And that way you can basically automate posts, or at least start the beginning of the post process without having to manually search that blog all the time. And you can also use Meet Edgar categories. So this is a good example of what I mentioned before when you kind of break things up into chunks, because chunks based on your goals. So, say you need to focus on, for your nurturing, it's a good idea generally to show like how to help people solve problems they have with whatever the topic is. So you can actually create a whole category based on that type of content. So here, for example, I've called it how-to, so like how-to articles, instruction articles, and I've indicated external. So I just want to track how-to and instructional articles by other people. That's where I want to not track, but I want to post them. And that way you can measure the results of that specific type of post. And it's just another marker, basically, you can add to figure out if something's working or not. And if you're spending too much time on it or too little time, or maybe you need to go in a certain direction that you didn't necessarily know before, breaking things into chunks and then publishing them that way, tracking them that way is super helpful. And these are not the default category titles, only the general one is. In Meet Edgar, I just changed them because this is how I would do it personally, depending on the audience, of course. So here's some other ways scaling can help. It can help you segment your time and content into buckets or goals, like I just mentioned. And that way you can also know what you're spending your time on. So if you're having a lot of conversations, a lot of conversations are happening around something you posted that's like a how-to article. Well, that way you know that maybe it's a good idea to put more time into that and less time into whatever the other bucket is. Scaling can really help that, especially when you group things like that. And it's also really helpful because you can know if it's not working at all. So, I mean, if I have a networking bucket and I, don't reach my objective for that, or I don't get anywhere with that, well, now I know that I actually just worked that amount of time unpaid, because I'm a freelancer, that actually means that I worked that time unpaid. So it's, as a freelancer, it's a little easier for me to justify being so regimented about like objectives. But because I'm thinking about it like from a financial standpoint and like paying myself, it gets much easier to justify those kinds of things. And that will help you with employers and clients as well, when you can prove that you're actually saving them time by making sure you're measuring the right things, you're tracking the right things, and you're not just being all over the place. And it can also, aside from telling you you've wasted your time, it might not mean that at all. It might just mean your objective for that thing was inappropriate. So this is another way that you can kind of use research to figure out like what those markers should be, and also who you're targeting. Because if you have objectives, then you can measure them and you can know if they're appropriate or anything like that. So from that point, you can test to figure out, well, is your target audience even on social? You might think they are, but you might be on the wrong track. Say I've seen people who just assume that the CEOs are the people they should be talking to, because the CEOs are the ones talking about it. The CEOs are maybe the ones who are signing the check if it's like a small startup or something. But it might not be them at all. So you have to do research outside of social to figure out like who those people are. Because maybe they do sign the check, but maybe they don't do the nurturing. Maybe they're not down with that. Maybe they don't have the time. Maybe that's not why they use social. Like, for example, CEOs, yes, they talk about a lot of things, but that's often because it's for their branding. It's not necessarily because they're receptive to going down a funnel with you for something. So yeah, you really have to do your research offline. And it can help you to do some social media research first to kind of figure out like where you should raise or target. So yeah, what your goals should and shouldn't be, if it's worth purchasing tools, and how do you justify that? If you're being really objective, like I'm describing, and it's very clear that you're scaling things, you can probably justify to an employer why it's worth investing in something, especially if it can save you time. Because like all the tools that I've just described earlier, those are mostly free tools. But say if you're on LinkedIn, well, you need to build a case for why a company would use Sales Navigator. So to do that, you kind of have to have a baseline success rate on LinkedIn to begin with. So usually you have to start something before you can assess if it's actually worth purchasing, or at least build a case for it. Yeah. So it can also figure out how you should reallocate your time, or if you should skip a method altogether. Also, I've noted that my dog has stopped barking, so I'm going to pretend that it's because my voice is so soothing. Let's just pretend. So yeah, and I've kind of mentioned this before, but once you've tested your objectives and formulas, then you can automate them. So you can use tools. You can just keep like a spreadsheet of formulas that work really well. Like you can have, one marker in one column, another marker, another column, and just plug and play into like a social media calendar or something. If it's time sensitive, you can start from like a spreadsheet with like templates. But if it's evergreen stuff, you can build that stuff like weeks in advance. Automations are really cool. And again, you can also scrap things that just aren't working, right? Because if you can objectively measure something that is working, then you can objectively measure that it isn't or can't. And so here are some of the things that you can figure out, well, let's just get rid of this. This isn't cool. So say you think that someone would be a warm lead, or you think that they're a good person to engage. So you're liking and responding to their posts. You're supporting them. You might be trying to do a campaign with them. But yeah, So if you do the research and figure out, well, this is actually a waste of time, then you can reallocate your resources to another person or another people, or maybe scrap that whole idea altogether because maybe that's just not the right path. So you can also figure out like stuff for your website. You can figure out, well, people actually don't really care about this particular topic, or this topic went over really, really well, so let's explore this. Or say you're doing a lot of research into your audience on like LinkedIn or Twitter, a TweetDeck or LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and you're figuring out that people are actually really receptive to something that you weren't really considering. Well, now you can build a whole new set of content around that and find ways to engage other people in your formulas. And you could actually probably create, I've never done this, but you could actually probably create a social media marketing plan with a partner and actually just hand off those formulas. Because if you give people work to do, instead of like asking them to figure it out on their own, they're probably more receptive to participating. So you could try that. It's certainly worth testing, I think, depending on who it is and depending on how savvy they are with social. Yeah, you can also figure out like if you've been participating in a Twitter chat every week and you're just not connecting with the target audience you needed to connect with, because you found that you weren't reaching the markers you set out. Well, just stop participating. I've done that because I found, I just found that it was. I remember one chat I just kind of changed niches first of all. And also I found the people who were participating weren't in my target audience. They were kind of my competitors. And I thought, well, why am I having a conversation with my competitors? And then I did the research and I found that I wasn't actually doing anything for me anyway. So, Mohammed has a comment. He says, how do you encourage clients to post on social media if they are hesitant to start being more active? That's a really, really great question. I think you really need to get to what their pain point is or what their grievance is with social. I find usually it's a combination of two things. That they don't realize they need it and they think that it's hurting them and you can't get away from that. So one thing you can do is figure out like what's important to them. Is it reviews? Do they want more reviews? Because like Facebook, if Facebook is where your target audience is, well, that would be a good place to get reviews. So that's just kind of a basic example. We can talk a little bit more about that after. But yeah, getting to your client's pain point and quelling any kind of mythology they have about why it works or why it doesn't work is probably the best way. Yeah, so now that it's actually over, I can go a little more into that question. And if you have any more questions after this, feel free to email me. And I have a bunch of resources that we can share with you as well. But yeah, that's a really, really great question. Thank you, Megan. Megan just put up the handout for me. That's a really great question, Mohammed. I think it really does depend on who your boss is and why they're hesitant. Is it because they're hoping for the wrong things from it? Are they thinking that because they're not going to get direct sales from it, that it's not worth their time? Are they not realizing that it's important to, like, for example, a lot of people before they use a company, they will actually look at that company's social media to see how they handle customer service things. There's a whole bunch of reasons. It really does depend. It kind of depends, Mohammed, on what the issue is. But yeah, does anyone have any other questions? Oh, thank you. Could you give some more examples of formulas? I'm still unclear about what a formula looks like. Okay, great. So let's go back. I don't remember what page that is. Just one sec. Sorry about that. Okay. So for this example, it could be, you know how people, when they post something on LinkedIn, there's like a quote. I'm just using LinkedIn as an example. They'll quote from an article, and then they'll mention the author of that handle, like, thanks Megan, this was a great article on such and such, and they'll do that after they quoted the article, and then they link to that particular article in that same post, and then they'll have like a bunch of hashtags. So all I'm doing is just taking, basically analyzing the anatomy of a post. And you can do that for any post that's really successful. Figure out like what's actually in that post. What are they doing? They're sharing a quote from someone that's about a specific topic. They are using an emoji. They're using specific hashtags. What exactly are they doing? So once you have like a recipe, it can be a little more helpful. I'm not sure that I'm really explaining that very well. I don't have an example right in front of me. But when I say a formula, all I'm doing is breaking down the anatomy of the post, and saying like what's actually in there. And once you know what's actually in there, you can figure out if that works or not. And you can take one piece out of that formula and see if it's working or not. Yay! Okay, I'm glad that helped. Sorry. Thank you that was good feedback, by the way. Formulas is a little unclear. It sounds like I'm talking about math or something. Okay, so I'll get to Ad's question first. Sometimes your target audience is on different platforms. Is it worth interacting on multiple social channels or just focusing on one or two? That's a great question. I think it really just depends on how much time you have to spend. Because while, like everything I'm saying, you can automate, but you can't really automate it. Well, you kind of can. You can't necessarily automate it across platforms, right? Because, you know, say this LinkedIn post recipe works really well. You can't really assume that it would work well on Twitter. So because you can't really scale across platforms in that same way, it does take extra time to put more time into platforms. So it becomes more important to focus on one or two, I'd say. But if your audience is on all, and you know that that's where they go if they want to see like what you're doing, and if they want to get a sense of, you know, your company cares about X, Y, Z, you can always just have like a routine post in there just to make sure that they know you're alive and that you know, they can reach out to you there. So I'd focus on one or two posts or one or two platforms usually. And then you can do a couple of other ones, just like one post a week or one or two posts a week or whatever. But in terms of like doing your community engagement and engaging with other people's posts, I would stick to one or two platforms usually, but it really depends on how much your company's willing to spend on it, because it does take extra time. Sharon asks, when running the social media for an organization with various audiences, stakeholders, how do you figure out the path that your audience wants to take with you? That's a really, really great question, especially because, you know, you might have some people who are on the same path, but they might have different expectations from you. So I think the important thing to note is, like when you are looking at those markers of like figuring out if something's successful or not. For example, I use the example of, you know, how do I know if I should ask someone if they want to subscribe to my newsletter? Like what indicators do I use to figure that out? I have a very specific audience in mind and a very specific goal in mind for that particular campaign. So, for example, I'm creating a course right now. It's not ready yet. So please subscribe to my newsletter, by the way, if you'd like to get a heads up on when the course is going to be ready. And I'll also give a nice discount in there. But I have people in mind who I think would be receptive to that course. So I do that campaign to target that specific group and for that specific goal. And I'm targeting very specific persona, people who talk about certain things. Those are other markers that I didn't mention. So you can have like the general markers like I described, But then you can have more specific ones that help you target a specific audience and a specific goal. And that way you can hyper target within your niche without alienating everyone else, all the other stakeholders, because it's of relevance to everyone, but you're just hyper targeting for specific things. So yeah, thanks for the shout out, Megan. Are there any other questions? Anything that's unclear, anything you'd like to go into a little more, please let me know, or if you just prefer to do it privately, you can email me again. I'll just pull my email up again. It's at the end here. Yep, so that's my email if you want to target, if you want to reach out again. Here's another question. If social media is not where you close sales, how do you know you are targeting people on social who will eventually buy and not just people who will follow and interact but never buy? That's another great question. So this is what I mean when social media is just kind of a piece of the puzzle. So if it's a piece of like the awareness puzzle, and your goal for that awareness cycle is to get people onto your newsletter, well, that's how you know that works. But then you also have to do the other work. So say you give them a specific coupon code that's just for them, or just for people on Twitter, for example, if you're doing it on Twitter, and you eventually see that person uses that code, well, that way you can see that actually ended up in a sale. But there are usually other things that you need to do off of social to figure out if it's going outside of the cycle that you set to, right? Because usually when you're on social, you're taking someone into a cycle. You're not necessarily taking them to the next cycle. So yeah, you kind of have to figure out like how to measure that. Is it you're making unique coupon codes? Is it maybe you have another objective that's not even has anything to do with closing a sale, which is probably more effective. Say you want people to tweet about an article or something because it has a subscription link. Whatever takes people into a cycle is what you're measuring within social itself. And then outside of that, you need another way to measure it. But you can usually integrate that with your social somehow. So that's kind of a convoluted answer, but it's one of those things that it really does depend on what your bandwidth is for measuring things offline. Yeah. So Keenan asks, what steps did you take to understand who your audience is on social? Well, I usually do that offline. So for me as a consultant, it was kind of online. Like the whole reason I became a consultant and started tweeting about this and doing all this marketing stuff, like webinars and stuff like that, blog posts, all that, is I found I was having to explain a lot of things to a new client before they would understand and get on board with what I was doing. So I figured out, well, there's a gap in knowledge there. And this audience has that gap, and they're actually actively asking me, emailing me, phoning me, making meetings with me because they want to learn more. And so I became a consultant because why would I do that for free? But yeah, so that kind of thing is usually offline. And then if you have something offline, then you have like little parameters. Well, now because I'm in this world, I know that to look for certain keywords. Have an idea of what my persona is, and that way you can like research social media there. But usually it starts like I started. You gauge interest offline, you see what gaps in the market exist offline, and then you take it on social. But yeah, so I really just had to talk to a lot of people in my niche and figure out like why don't they understand certain things? Like, are there certain myths out there? And then from there I figured out, well, who's sharing those myths? But yeah, it really does depend, but usually it's just about talking to people and sharing, doing work for them and seeing what they're receptive to, what they understand, what they don't understand, doing market research to see like what your competitors are doing, reading reviews. I find it really helpful actually to read through like Reddit and Quora, because you can see like what people genuinely don't understand or what they are actively like opposed to. Like some people are very vocal about like how much they hate a company, and maybe it's a specific type of person who hates that company, or maybe it's a specific company that these people prefer. I mean, you don't really know that till you research offline and then kind of bring your insights onto social. So I hope that answers your question. It kind of really does depend, but you usually start the research offline and then take it onto social. So are there any other questions before we skedaddle? My dog still isn't barking, so this is exciting. Thank you. Okay. So I think this question is kind of about loyalty. So like, how do you get people to buy repeatedly? I think the key there is to build loyalty. Like you want to be, it's in your customer service really on social. Like you want people to see that you're accountable for what you're doing and that you care about the topic and all that. So if you're really loyal and you're really great at customer service on social, I've personally worked with companies solely because I know I can hold them accountable on social. Like I know that they're going to respond to me. I know that I'm going to get lots of information from them if I need help with something. And I know a lot of that's going to come from social. So that can kind of help, but you can't really rely on social for continuing sales. It's more about nurturing insights and that kind of thing. And maybe it's entertaining them, but that's kind of hard to measure. Like if something makes people laugh, if their social media content makes you laugh, are you more likely to keep buying from them? I don't know. It's really hard to say, but I certainly would never rely on social to instill that kind of loyalty that would get people to renew or continue to buy more products. The idea there more is to make sure that you're accountable to them and that you also stay top of mind for them. So if you know you have like a specific audience that you work really well in, just be in their space, have conversations with them in their space, support what they're doing. And if you're more visible to them and you can see that you really understand their issue, they may be more receptive to come back to you. But you can't, there's no way to set that in stone. Any other questions? All right, so feel free to email me if you have any questions. And don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter if you'd like any insights or whatever. And thank you so much. This was awesome, Megan. Thanks for having me.
Ashley. Thank you so much for joining us today. You guys, I will send out the replay and I'll send out her slides along with that because I know they were chock full of really great words on there that I would like to reread. So I'll send that out today. If you want to get in touch with Ashley, let her know. She sent her email out. I'll put it in the email from Meet Edgar as well. And thanks for joining. We will see you guys again next time. Have a good one, everyone.
Bye.